Hey guys, this is Doug. I'm here with Richard. Welcome back to Danger Planet. And today we're going to be doing a first impressions video of Eldfall Chronicles. Okay. Hey guys, welcome back to Danger Planet. This is actually going to be our first impressions video on a game that Rich and I have been testing out for the last, I would say, probably about 2 weeks now. Rich, you think it's fair?
Yeah,
Um,
that sounds right.
yeah, and it's actually called Eldfall Chronicles. So for folks that don't know what Eldfall Chronicles is, I'm going to give you guys a little bit of a quick background on the lore and the setting and about kind of the core structure of the game. And then Rich is going to run you guys through a faction by faction breakdown. So there's 4 factions in the game. Rich is going to go over what they each do at a high level and kind of how each of their play mechanics will play out on the battlefield. And then to cap off this episode, Rich and I are just going to kind of have an open conversation about our first impressions and thoughts with the game system. So stick around. I think this one is going to be something that you guys are going to really enjoy. So the first part of this is, what is Eldfall? So Eldfall was a skirmish game that was kickstarted originally a little bit ago. Recently, the game has gone live. So they have a website. It's eldfall-chronicles.com/shop. Well, that's the shop website, but in general, it's eldfallchronicles.com. You can actually get all of the rules for free on that website. You can get all the character cards for free on that website. And you can actually start to order stuff from their shop on that website. So the big high-level concept on this game, guys, is that it's a skirmish game that is generally going to be using somewhere between 3 to 5 models. Rich, you think that's fair to say?
Yes, based on the recommended game size.
Yeah, about 3 to 5 models aside. And it can be more than one player. Right now, the core rules are designed for either PvP, one-on-one, or PvE games. They have stated that you can do like two players versus 2 players, but the primary game modes that Rich and I have tested have been PvP one-on-one and PvE with 2 players. I would say that's probably right now where the rules fit the best. Wouldn't you say, Rich?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, you can do other stuff, but I would say if you're looking for kind of the way to experience the game that the designers intended it, I would say that's kind of what you're looking at. So from a lore perspective, guys, the world is set in Khalid, or Khalad, or DJ Khalad, depending on, however you want to say it. And effectively, this strikes me as kind of a mishmash of Greek Titan story, kind of wound into a creation myth story. And you can tell they've actually pulled on a lot of different cultures in a lot of interesting ways. But the high level here is that there's a realm or a space that's inhabited, and eventually these elders, which are in my mind kind of the equivalents of the Greek mythos Titans, they end up having this universe that they're involved in. Eventually, a portal opens in that universe, and monsters and all sorts of nasty stuff starts to spill out of that. The native people fight those back, and then later down the timeline, mankind actually comes through that portal. So mankind is the aggressor in this scenario, and the native Khalidians, I guess, fight them off. Eventually, some of them start to side with the native population, and other portions of them become rogue. And effectively, what you have is present-day Eldfall, which is these 4 predominant factions that are ruling over different subsections of the world, right? You've got, I think one of them is north, south, east, and west, effectively. But Rich will go over a little bit more of the background on each of those factions as he's talking about them. He's a little bit better on that lore than I am right now. But that's what I would say is a very high-level TLDR of what's going on with this game system. If you guys want to get involved in the game system and you're interested in buying into it, they've actually done a really good job of giving people a couple of different levels of accessibility here. So the base level, if all you want to do is just get a crew to play with your friends, you can buy what's called one of the faction starter kits, and those will come with 4 models that are all kind of designed to be played on a team together. There's the Coalition of Fenin, the Hylian League, the Sand Kingdoms, as well as the Empire of Soga. And Rich is about to go over all those for you guys. He'll explain kind of what each one of them does. And then right now, you can purchase what's called the core box. That box it looks like it's about 150 euro, and it comes with all 4 of the different faction starters, as well as one large Sphinx creature to battle, which is like a PvE element. And it comes with all the tokens that you need to play the game, as well as the objective cards and the templates and the rulers. It actually also even comes with dice, which is pretty cool. And it also comes with a set of terrain that's like a pop-up cardboard set of terrain. If any of you guys played like old school, like 2nd edition Warhammer 40k with that cardboard orc dreadnought, you'll know what I'm talking about. It's kind of like in that vein. And then they have an upgraded bundle called their Warlord bundle, which they basically replace the circular disc tokens of the monsters, because that comes in the box. It replaces those with the actual models for the monsters. And if you want, you can buy that separately. It's called the Earthen Creatures expansion. The Warlord bundle, I think, is like 250 euro, and I think the Earthen Creatures is like 120. It comes with 2 big golems, 2 sand golems, 2 small gargoyles, and 1 massive sphinx. So I guess with that, that's kind of a high level overview from my perspective on like the who, what, when, what of this whole scenario. Rich, do you want to start to go over the 4 different factions for everybody? I guess where would you like to start, sir?
Sure. So the first faction is the Empire of Soga, which is the most northern of the factions. So it's very, very cold and very unforgiving territories. Their main thing is they're mostly, I would say, Japanese-inspired samurai and bowmen, and also they have kitsune, so the fox people, on their side as well. They have almost no magic in their entire faction, so they are very much melee and ranged focused, and they are the heaviest damage dealers of just direct damage of any of the factions that are currently available.
And they're pretty fast. They've got a lot of movement plus damage abilities, like natively on the cards and stuff.
They have a lot of mobility as well. Yeah.
And they have a lot of passes that can give them extra attack dice. So not only do they do high damage, but they also can do lots of attacks and move pretty fast.
Yeah, I would say that their advantage is just their mobility and their damage output. Non-magical damage output is very high. The downside is that they don't quite have the versatility. They do a couple things pretty well, and they're
not a one-trick pony, but
no.
We're not saying that they're a multi-trick pony either.
No, exactly.
Yeah. I think that's a really fair description of them. But they're deadly. I mean, you and I have played games where you send in that they have that neutral character that can be allied to other factions, which is the samurai with the 2-handed blade, and you bump that up with a couple of buffs and you throw that in. I mean, I got into a game with that where I cleared your entire crew with that one model.
Oh yeah, the Onataushi is pretty great. Yeah.
I mean, there's some schmagling to be had there for sure.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah. All right, what's next up on your deep dive here, Mr. Richard?
So the next one is the Hylian League. The Hylian League they're kind of the prosperous and wealthy nation of Kalad. As far as the faction itself goes, they are kind of the middle of the road faction. They have a little bit of everything. They have magic, they have healing, they're very tanky. But their whole thing is that they empower one another. So the more of them you have, the stronger they all get. But
soldier stacking, baby.
Yep. But as you start to lose them, they get increasingly weaker, and then also they do not have very good mobility. They are generally the slowest models in the game. In addition to that, they also, more so than others, really need to kind of stick together. The stronger models really need to keep the squishier models alive, and so any tactic which you find yourself needing to maybe spread out a little, they might not do as well at as some of the other factions.
Yeah, they benefit from like tanking up together. They've got a bunch of their models have like take the hit abilities or like lookout sir abilities where they can jump in front of incoming attacks. They have guys in heavy armor. They've got healing abilities. I would say, having played these fine gentlemen a couple times now, I really like them. They fit my playstyle very well, but I would say they definitely do not have the sucker-punch damage that, for example, the samurai-themed Japanese-inspired faction that we just talked about does. I mean, it's almost not even comparable in terms of damage output. They're really more focused on survivability, tankability, healing. They have some spike spells that are really good, and they have some access to some really good magic spells. But their forte is not just blatant melee, I would say.
Yeah, they're more about survivability, whereas the Soga are more about damage, non-magical damage output.
Yeah, it is worth noting in this game that many of the models in this game are neutral available, and actually in the faction boxes, one in each of the 4 models is what's called a neutral, like neutrally available. So any faction can hire that into their crew. So what I was thinking about doing / what I'm gonna do is when I play these guys, the Healing League, I'm gonna hire in that two-handed swordsman because that's the neutral faction samurai model in the starter. And oh boy, is that good, especially when you put some defensive buffs on that thing. So.
Yeah, that is a strong thing. It's just you have to keep in mind that they don't get the, although they are neutral and hireable, they're not going to get the buffs from the leader unless they're in keyword. The Coalition. So Coalition of Thenion, they are essentially dark elves. They live underground, hence they have
Sir, don't say that so dismissively. Say that with like, holy shit, we got us some dark elves, Let's go.
Everyone likes a good dark elf. So they live underground. They live in big, massive underground cave cities, and they don't really have an army. They don't really even have a concept of an army. So their whole thing is guerrilla warfare. So they are the most mobile of all of the factions. They have very fast models. They have models that can fly and can otherwise ignore terrain and buildings or whatnot. And then they also have access to abilities like stealth and shroud that allows them to either reduce how easy it is to see and react to them, or just make it outright impossible to see or react to them. Now, the downside to that is that they are all absolutely paper thin.
Super squishy.
Super squishy. And now this is a game where the average model only has 2 hit points, but the average model in this faction has 1 hit point and almost no armor. So they are very fast, and they can be difficult to pin down. But if you pin them down, they're gonna die probably immediately.
Playstyle really reminds me of Dark Eldar in Warhammer 40k or Harlequins in Warhammer 40k.
Yeah, they're very rogue-like too. If you've ever played any version of Dungeons and Dragons, they have a very similar rogue-like abilities. They get bonuses for attacking models from behind, and
you know what I think we should talk about actually, this is a good segue point, Richard. Why don't we talk about the general D&D-esque tier abilities, because you mentioned rogue-like, but we should probably mention, folks, an interesting part of this game is that models will have a stat card on them, right? And the stats are there's a whole different litany of stats. We're going to make a video going over the rules of how to play Eldfall, so we're not going to get into it super aggressively right now because that's a different video.
Yeah.
But when models have stat types or roles, so for example, if I'm looking at the Nightshade, which is a coalition model, she's an assassin and a rogue. And just like in D&D, those come with specific static benefits for when you're doing things. And it's very reminiscent of like a D&D player's manual when you open it and you look at like the attribute buffs, and it'll get interesting. So that like things might be like a warrior priest, or like for example, I said the Nightshade before, so we'll stay on her. she's an assassin rogue, which comes with a specific set of abilities. But also, if you look at the back of the Nightshades card, she has assassination. And assassination is a great example of the tiered abilities because she has level 4 assassination. So if you look at her card, she has access to aiming for the vitals, cunning precaution, overwhelming assault, and decisive blow. Rich, why don't you talk and explain a little bit about how those tier ability lists work, and then why don't you explain a little bit about how stratagems work as well, because we're going to show this card while you're talking so folks can follow along, and I think this would be a good way to talk about this.
So yeah, as like you said, there are classes, which every model has at least one class, and some can have multiples. When you're looking at specifically Nightshade or any really models, there's in addition to the classes, which are at the top, there are generally traits, skills, and then either, depending on what type of model it is, it will either be a spellcraft or a combat art. And the combat art and the spells are all tiered. And the way, basically, the way that those tiers work is that you'll be between 1 and 4 depending on the art. And those are just extra abilities that you get to add to either your attack, if it's a combat art, or to your spells, if it's a spellcraft. And generally, when there's multiple tiers, you whatever level you are, you get access to that and all of the lower tiers. And you can only ever pick one. So during any particular attack, you can only ever use one of those abilities. But you can choose, and you can choose it based on the scenario. So someone that has like fencing 4 or assassinate 4, that gives you access to 4 different abilities that you can every time you make an attack, whatever type of attack it's relevant towards, you get to choose which one of those you want to do and which one of those is the most helpful for that scenario. I think that's a very interesting way of giving multiple abilities and also choice to the different models. So.
Well said, Mr. Richard. Well said.
And they are stacking, and there are upgrades that actually can add or increase the level of combat arts. So that's also something that's pretty interesting as well.
So that just leaves us with one last faction and one last mechanic. So, Mr. Richard, why don't you give folks a little bit of overview, not only on the Sand Kingdom, but on how sorcery and summoning works in this game.
So the Sand Kingdom is kind of just a catch-all for a whole bunch of different areas in the western part of the world, and it's kind of separated from the rest by a big empty desert. And the Sand Kingdom is, and foremost, spellcasters. Every single model in the faction is a spellcaster of some kind. They have the strongest magic in the game. They have the most varied magic in the game. And they're also the only faction that currently has access to conjugation, which is the fancy word that they use for summoning. And so they're similar to the Thenians, where they're very, very weak and they're very low hit points and low armor. But instead of using mobility to make up for that, they essentially have the ability to summon monsters or creatures that can kind of act as protection for them. And
they have some defensive spells that are pretty spicy. To be fair, some models have spicy defensive attacks.
Yeah, they do. Some do also have some defensive spells that they can do. But their primarily way of staying alive is usually just hiding behind these big bulky monsters, or just creating other threats so that you kind of have to focus on those first before you can worry about killing their actual models that they started the game with. And the way that summoning works in this game is that there is a resource called mana, which
mana
or mana, which you can essentially turn activation points, which, without going into too much detail, is just how you do things, how you take actions. So you can instead of using those for actions, you can convert them directly to mana, and that never goes away. So the mana stacks. It can stack as much as you want, and you can keep it between turns. So it kind of creates a situation where you sacrifice the ability to do things one turn in order to build up this mana, so that on the following turns you can then use that to cast these very powerful spells. There are some spells in the game that are not summon spells that also require mana, but all of the summoning spells require at least 1 mana to cast. But in exchange, you get another model, which in a game where you only have three or four, 5 models, adding an entirely another model is a fairly large piece of advantage. It also gives them a lot of versatility because they can choose which model they need to summon based on the situation and the objective and what they're facing off against.
I think you make a good point there, Mr. Richard. I think twofold. One, just so folks have context, we're going to do more videos on this game system. This is just kind of like a first impressions, what the hell's going on type video. But these monsters are not like Nicky Knack. Like, these are very large golems that are sometimes primary enemies in PvE missions, for example. And I also have the feeling that we'll probably see more summonables as they release expansions. Like, I know they have another expansion coming out soon. I think at the end of Q1 or Q2. They just announced their second Kickstarter actually yesterday. It's not open yet, but that is technically not an expansion. It's kind of we can talk about that after. It's kind of a separate thing, but I assume it will also have new models that can be used for the base game. Yeah. So I guess, you did an excellent job, Mr. Richard. Thank you for your insight, valuable as always. So I guess the last thing is just kind of like, let's have a chat. You and I have played at this point, between the two of us, at least 20 games of this system, I'd say. What are your thoughts, man? Like, what are your thoughts in comparison to the other skirmish games that you either know about, have played very competitively? What do you like about the game system? What don't you like about the game system? And I guess before he goes into that, I will preface this so just folks have a high level context. The TLDR of the closest analogy that I can find for this experience is kind of like if you took Kingdom Death and you mashed it into infinity. Whenever you're trying to do things in this game, it follows a action point based system and reaction point based system that feels very similar to the infinity system. The big difference here is that models, unlike in infinity, you can't just dump all of your AP or your action points or your action allocation into a single model. Models have what's called a stamina value, and that stamina value statically carries the amount of action points that they can have during an active phase and also during what's called their reactive phase. It's also very similar to infinity in that you've got stats in your cards and you're rolling. It's a D20 based system, so you're rolling D20s and you're trying to match or below a particular stat. We'll go into the details of how combat works. This isn't the video for that, but very, very high level. That's kind of what you guys are working with. Take it away, Richard. What do you think?
Yeah, so I've played a lot of miniature games. I've played 40K and Age of Sigmar. I've played a lot. I played a lot of Star Wars Legion, and also I currently play a lot of Malifaux. I think that this game
Rumble Slam.
I've also played Infinity, but I hate Infinity, which is ironic because I love this game and it is very similar. I think that this game fills an interesting niche because it is a very small model count skirmish game. I can't think of, other than something like Rumble Slam or Blood Bowl or something like that, I can't really think of any other miniature games that are quite, I guess Kill Team, but three models on each side is not a lot. So it really puts a lot of emphasis on each model and each activation. And it's a very tactical game. And it's like you said, the main back and forth of this game is kind of the active reactive player turn. So it is alternating turns, meaning that like one player gets their turn and they get to activate all of their stuff, and then the next player gets to activate all of their stuff. So it is alternating turns as opposed to alternating activations. But every time you, as the active player, do something, the reactive player gets the opportunity to react to that. So you can't just do whatever you want with reckless abandon because you'll get destroyed. So it creates a very interesting sort of mind game kind of system where you know what you need to do, but you might not know the best order in which you need to do it. Sometimes you might need to intentionally make suboptimal plays in order to kind of bait out reactions from your opponent so that you can then do other things without having to worry about what they're going to do. It's very interesting. And it's also very, like, every model is important, but also every model is fairly easy to kill. So you have to be pretty conscious of what you do and where you place models and what actions you choose to take. Because if you make a bad choice, it's very easy to lose a model. And when you only have 3 models, that's almost half your army down the drain.
Yeah, losing a model off the table is a big deal.
Yeah.
I think the most interesting gameplay mechanic for me is the active versus reactive.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I came from my gaming history took me. I started out in Warhammer 40k and Age of Sigmar, which is I go, you go, I go, you go. Then I went to Malifaux, which is my model activates, your model activates, right?
Right.
So we're going from whole army activations trading into single chest style activations.
Yep.
And now this is, I don't have as much experience in the Infinity game system as you do. You're a little surly and spicy about it. I'm actually cautiously optimistic about it. I actually have been amassing a Hawk Islam, but pretty big amount of Hawk Islam stuff right now. I just need to get into it and build it all. That I'm actually really excited to try. But I don't know exactly what I'm in for. In this game, for me, a lot of the experience was wrapped around trying to understand how my opponent's reactions could either kill my models, or really mess up the thing I was trying to do. Because it was a very novel experience for me to have an activation of a model and then go be like, all right, I need to walk over this direction and then proc this spell. But the way that the game works is such that in the course of doing those things, Richard L.M. Butler Esquire III will be able to blast me with as many magical things as he wants, as long as my guy is in line of sight of all his mages. So, like, I can't just, even in my own activation, go do a thing that I want to without considering the board state at all times. So when we're playing, it always just felt like both players were always playing both turns to me.
It really fixes the problem that I find with games like Warhammer, where it's alternating turns, because it feels like a lot of times you're just sitting there waiting, sometimes for an hour, for your opponent to just kill you or do whatever he has to do. Whereas in this, it's like you said, even when it's not technically your turn, you still have everything your opponent does gives you potentially the opportunity to do something and react to it and make a decision. So there's a lot of back and forth regardless. And also it's like some models are just better on defense. Like there's models that, when you're the active player, their stats are trash and that's not really what they're meant for. But when you're the reactive player, now all of a sudden their attacks do more damage, or
like the big Earth Golem pair when we were playing the PvE scenario, and they had double the amount of reaction AP that they had for active AP. So when it wasn't their turn, they had 4 AP, but when it was, they had 2. That was crazy.
And their like stats are higher when they're on reactive, so it's easier for them to hit you when they're reacting versus when it's their turn. So I think that's a very interesting way to balance different models as well.
Yeah, it's a cool design space. I mean, all right, then I guess the next big question is, Mr. Richard, what are you most looking forward to about the game system? I mean, I think you and I agree. Like, on a Rotten Tomatoes rating of like it, hide it, whatever it. I mean, we both pretty strongly agree. We think this is a good game system, right?
Yeah, I think that it's a really good game system. I think that obviously it's early game. It's early in the game's lifestyle. There are not a lot of models. There's not a ton of content available, but they have the the core system in place, and they have a lot of different variables and a lot of things that can be mix and match. So even like something like the class system, there's so many classes, and there's so many ways you could combine those classes. So it really allows a lot of opportunity in the future for new models or new stats and new things. And also the upgrade system is super important, and it also opens up a lot of room for different combinations. So even though there's not, like, even right now, there's only really 4 models for any given faction.
Well, with the expansion, there's going to be 6 now, or 5 to 6 depending on which one, because there's the expansion pack that comes with 2 new models for each.
Correct. So at the moment there's 4. With the expansion, you're looking at a maximum of about 6. It depends on the faction. Some factions, they're only actually, like, the Athenians only have 1 new model. It's just a mounted, non-mounted, but it's actually 1 model.
Yeah, and there is still there's still a drip flow of like neutral style. So like of those, like, there's at least 1 neutral style character or like hireable in each faction. So that means that that's immediately 3 others that whatever faction you're playing can pull into.
Yeah, there's a lot of combination. Even with such a small number of models already, there's already a lot of combinations between the different models, the different neutrals you can take, the different upgrades you can take. One thing that's interesting, which I didn't realize until earlier today, is that you can, if you want to take an Onitaushi in the Helion League, you can take that because it's neutral, and then you can put Helion upgrades on it, because the upgrades you can take are determined by your declared faction, not the faction of the model. So
you know what you're doing.
Yeah, exactly.
You're giving that samurai a flying magic carpet and sending it out to kill things. At least that's what I would do.
I'm considering putting the samurai on a flying carpet. Yes.
I knew it. I knew it. The internet. I knew it. The internet. I knew this mother was gonna do that. God damn it.
But also you could take the new dragoon. You can take that into the Sogas, and you can give them a longbow, because the Sogas just have an upgrade that's a longbow, and so you can just have a dragoon that also has a longbow. So it's a lot of cool things you can do, and I think that's
the items are tied into the PvE element of the game. Is very narrative. It can be very narrative focused. So these items can play a big part in ongoing PvE campaigns if players decide that they want to go that route. I mean, Richard and I are just big competitive spikes that like to throw dice at each other and scream at each other on Monday night at our LGS. So that's why our brains immediately go to PvP. But it's worth noting that these items really do play a big part in the relative experience of the PvE narrative component of the game, which is pretty cool. I guess I'm just going to close it out by saying thanks, guys. We hope you enjoyed this video. Obviously, Eldfall is a really new game system for us, for it even. The game really is basically just released. So we're going to be making a couple videos. One of them is going to be the basics of how to play Eldfall, written from the book of me and Rich's own hits. And then we're probably going to give some high-level strategy overviews and like reviews of some of the narrative campaign and stuff. And if the internet yells at us enough, we'll make a battle rep about it, I guess.
Not that.
Say goodbye to the internet, Richard.
Goodbye, internet.
Goodbye, internet. Welcome to Domino's. How can I take your order? Sir, we don't need a video screen of your people in this recording, sir. Please put that away. Sir.
All right.
Good, sir. Khaled! DJ Khaled! Is that you?
I don't know. I will say that they definitely did all of their research, because all of the stuff that they have in Japanese is like actually correct. It's not like fake or broken Japanese. So
can we be honest with one another though?
What?
Do you think that DJ Khaled helped make this game?
Almost certainly not.
We the best tabletop skirmish.
He may have kickstarted it, like maybe anonymously, because he didn't want like undue pressure on the devs. So like
Dude,
he just kickstarted under like one of his pseudonyms, like
do you think
I
DJ
don't know,
Khaled
like
is humble enough to have a pseudonym in the first place?
it's Doug. It's not humble is not why you have pseudonyms. You have pseudonyms because you want to pretend to be one of the normal people. It's like that time when Michael Jackson got like a grocery store to shut down and open up at like 3 a.m. so he could go shopping without people, so that he could experience what it's like to go grocery shopping, because he had never been in a grocery store in his life.
What the are you talking about? When did this happen?
Oh, this was years ago. It was like in the 90s. This is a thing. Like, yeah, Michael Jackson wanted to go grocery shopping, and he'd never been grocery shopping, and it was the 90s, so he couldn't just go to a grocery store because he'd get mobbed. So like he called up a grocery store, as people call them up, and they're like, "Hey, Michael would like to come in and just like do some shopping like after hours," and they just shut the place. They like shut the place down early one night, and like he had like a bunch of his friends and family come in and pretend to be like random shoppers, and he just took a stroll through the grocery store with his little cart, and he picked out some things and some snacks and some food, and then he just wanted to feel like a regular person. And so maybe, just maybe,
That's one of the
DG
saddest stories I've ever heard about Michael
it
Jackson.
really he was like used as a child and forced to perform that, and that's the saddest story.
Yes, Richard. I
Wow.
have a very specific subset of
Yeah,
ideals.
your priorities are a little whack.
Well, I mean,
So the moral of this this tangent is that perhaps DJ Khaled has uses pseudonyms or alternate personas so that he can go about his business in guy cognito.
oh, that's a big word.